Hi, friends and family. When we hear the Isle of Saints, the island of Ireland is thought of. When we think of Ireland, which is nestled in the blue waters of the Atlantic, St. Patrick comes to mind. When we think of the month of May, however, it is often associated with planning for summer vacations, what we're going to do, how we're going to spend it, what adventures we're going to have. Graduations are happening. But most importantly, it's referred to as Mental Health Awareness Month. It shouldn't be surprising that St. Patrick isn't the only great saint of this little island. In this video, I will uncover two more saints that is not only from Ireland, but associated with mental health. One such saint who, on the account of her spotless virtue and glorious martyrdom, is sometimes referred to as the Lily of Ireland, Saint Dymphna. True, the records of her life and martyrdom are of this holy virgin are for the most part unsatisfactory, but significant is known regarding the principal facets of her life and of her many well authenticated miracles to attest to the unexalted sanctity. This is the life, legend, and legacy of Saint Dymphna and the development of the compassion of a small town. In the 7th century, there's two things to remember about Ireland. One, Ireland was almost universally Catholic and Christian. That's one. But two, Ireland, as I'm sure that you realize by a lot of documentaries about Ireland, was divided into special in little provinces or kingdoms. One such kingdom of where Saint Dymphna was born in the 7th century was Aragala or Uria, those in English. And despite the island being universally Catholic, her father was very pagan and also a very petty king at best. Her mother, on the other hand, a descendant of a noble family, was a devout Christian who was remarkable both for her piety and great beauty. Dymphna was like her mother, a paragon of beauty, for the most part, a sweet and winning child, the jewel of her home, many would say. Now, you with kids, I'm sure that you can sympathize with that. When you're around your child or you see your child accomplish something, whether it be graduation or learning something new, that child seems more clear in your eyes, more precious, more priceless. There's a more clarity to that child. Every affection and every attention was lavished upon her from birth. Heaven, too, favored this child with special graces. Dymphna was placed early on under the care and tutelage of a pious Christian woman who prepared her for the sacrament of baptism, which was confirmed upon the second person that we will talk about in this video, Father Gerbrand. The good father seemed to be a member of the household, not just a pastor that they would attend mass or go to confession, but a deep advocate in the household. Because this father also taught little Dymphna her letters, along with the truths of the religion. Dymphna was a bright and eager people and advanced rapidly in wisdom and grace. When still very young, Dymphna, like so many other noble Irish maidens, before and after her, being filled with favor and fever and love for Jesus Christ and her Savior, chose him for her divine spouse and consecrated her virginity to him and to his blessed mother by a vow of chastity at the tender age of 14. Now, what does this show us into the glimpse of Dymphna's character? She loved to learn. She was curious. She was like a sponge that just soaked up all the knowledge that she could because she, despite being very young, had this intuition that knowledge is power. And the more knowledge you have, the better. Despite all this knowledge that she gained as a child, despite all the blessings that was given to her from childhood, an unexpected and overshadowing cross and cloud would overshadow her happy childhood of this beautiful girl. She lost her mother to death. Many secret tears were shed by Dymphna over her mother's death, but at the same time, she found great comfort in the divine faith, which, though she was at a tender age, already had taken deep root. That should also tell us many things about her sanctity and her faith, because her faith had to be very structured, deep rooted, built on a base foundation. Many youth today build their faith on an unstable foundation. They know of Jesus, they know of God, they go to church, they pray, they do what they're supposed to do, what the faith says that they're supposed to do. But when tragedy or something unexpected happens, when they get fired from a job, when they get very sick, when they are diagnosed with cancer, when they have unexpected cross, when things don't go their way, they question their faith. They question and doubt whether God exists. But not Dymphna. Dymphna had faith that despite this tragedy, her mother was still with her, in her heart, in her mind. All the lessons that she taught her. Her deep friend was lost, but or was gone, but yet was not gone. Dymphna's father, too, greatly mourned his deceased wife's death, and for a long time continued to prostrate with grief. At length, he was persuaded by his counselors by seeking solace in a second marriage. Now, why would his counselors do that? Do you think many of this is my editorial thought edition about what I have read? What would make your advisors, or I guess we could say friends, say, maybe you should take root in a second marriage? This tells us that they were concerned about the king because he probably was not able to fulfill his kingly duty, his responsibilities to the people of his kingdom, or was distracted when his advisors or counselors asked for his advice. He wasn't really there. Have you ever felt that feeling? So very concerned, his friend says, why don't you take part in the second marriage? Get out of this slump. So he commissioned certain ones of his court to seek out for him a lady that would be like his first spouse in beauty and character. This, I'm sure, would perhaps show you his pettiness. After visiting many countries in vain, the messengers returned saying, as you can imagine, that we could find no one so charming and admirable as your wife. There's no one. And we traveled continent after continent after country after country. We couldn't find anyone. But there is one person that might fill your desires. What about your daughter, Dymphna? Giving ear to their base suggestion, the king conceived the evil design and plot of marrying Dymphna. With persuasive and flattering words, he manifests his purpose to her. And how do you think Dymphna reacted to her proposal. Just for a minute, whether you're man or woman, it doesn't really matter. Picture yourself as a 14, 15-year-old boy or girl. And your 40, 50, 60-year-old mother or father was so depressed, so just couldn't concentrate, filled with anxiety, that he came to you to ask your hand in marriage. Probably be very shocked, horrified. This is exactly how Dymphna felt. She asked for him a period of 40 days. Now, what's significant about this in my mind? She was very intelligent, very witty, but she kind of hid her shock and horrification and said, you know what, Dad, let me consider this prospect for 40 days to consider it. She immediately ran off to Father Jerobrand, who advised her to flee from her native country. Run. And since the danger was immediate, he urged her to make no delay. With all speed, therefore, she set out for the continent, accompanied by Father Jerobrand, the court jester, and his wife. Now, why not? Why did Dymphna feel the need to go get the wife and the court jester to flee with Father Jerobrand? Why not take Father Jerobrand, just him and her? Well, you have to remember that at this time she was probably about 14 years old, and with all the anxiety, with the loss of her mother, with the shock of what her father and the urgency, and that she was leaving her home, the only place that she knew that even Dymphna would need a good chuckle nowadays, a good upbeat to, someone to laugh with and entertain her and take her mind off her problems. And being that this was in the 7th century, you can kind of picture that this journey wasn't going to be just a runaway in 2 days. I mean, all there was walking, was horseback, and if you're going to cross the sea, boat. After a favorable passage, they arrived on the coast near the present city of Antwerp in Belgium. Having stopped there for a short rest, they resumed their journey, and came to a little village named Geel, Belgium. Here they found great hospitality, and it was so apparent with the hospitality that they received, they made plans to settle there and establish their future abode at this place because it was so welcoming. The king, in the meantime, after 40 days, realizing Dymphna had fled, might expect he was very angry at this betrayal of his daughter, her trickery, her deception, and immediately set out with his followers in search of the fugitive. Imagine being such a petty father and such a pagan that you were referred to your own daughter as a fugitive. After some time, they traced the fugitives to Belgium and found their place of refuge. And how did they find Dymphna? Well, that is kind of an open-ended question, isn't it? Well, let me ask you something. If you were a king and were very pagan and petty and wanted this just for your own narcissistic needs and wants, How do you think you would find your daughter to make known and persuade her to return to you? Well, I don't know, but I can kind of put my place in the king is the fact that he probably made wanted posters, sent words far and wide to locate the fugitives. Also, remember, Dymphna was a princess, her father was a king, and her late mother was a queen. So it probably seems very likely that the image of the king, queen, or the family was on their currency, kind of like in the Bible, to where what Caesar's image was on the tax coin. Obviously, Dymphna was not dumb. Court Jester was not dumb. Father Jeroboam was not dumb. They knew to take what funds they needed to survive. And because Dymphna was so wrapped up in this, I believe there's even stories of her building and making places of refuge for people that were dealing with depression, anxiety, and a lot of different problems. At first, when Dymphna's father found her, he tried to persuade her to return home with him. But Father Jeroboam strictly rebuked him for his wicked intentions, whereby he gave strict orders to kill Father Jeroboam on the spot. Without delay, his retainers laid violent hands on the priest and beheaded him right there. Now, where was I? Oh, well, now that distraction is done, and I can go on. Okay. Oh, come on, Dymphna. Let's return home. Just marry me. Everything will be all right. After repeated attempts, despite his spurned empty promises and cruel threats, and with great courage, kept on denying. Infuriated by her resistance, the father ordered her to be executed. Now, in some of the dialogues and the stories that I have read, the retainers was kind of hesitant. I mean, kill a priest, of course, sure, no problem. King, you're joking. You want us to kill your own daughter? When they hesitated, the king withdrew his own dagger and chopped off his child's head. The Holy Virgin fell prostrate at the feet of her insanely raving father. Thus, the glorious crown of martyrdom was accorded to Saint Dymphna in the 15th year of her age, on the 15th day of May, between 620 and 640. The day of her death was assigned as her feast day. Her story does not end there, though. The records of Dymphna's life and death say that the bodies of the two martyrs saints laid on the ground for quite some time after their death. And you can kind of picture that because of the fact that, first of all, her father was pissed at her denial. So obviously, he's just going to execute it. He's not going to bury his own daughter. The inhabitants of Geel, showing great mercy and charity to these two martyred people, removed them to a cave, which was the customary matter of interment in that part of the world at that time of the martyrdom. But after several years had elapsed, the villagers, recalling their holy deaths, decided to give the bodies a more suitable burial. Again, trying to denote a act of mercy to these two individuals that have become more like friends, even though that their lives in Geel were short-lived. When the workmen removed the heap of black earth at the cave's entrance, great to their astonishment, they found two most beautiful tombs, whiter than snow, which were carved from stone, as if they were carved by angels' hands. When the coffin of Saint Dymphna was opened, there they found laying on her breast a red tile bearing the inscription, "Here lies the Holy Virgin and Martyr Dymphna." The remains of the saints were placed in a small church. Later, they erected a great church of Saint Dymphna, which now stands on the site where the bodies were first buried. Saint Dymphna's relics were reposed there in a beautiful golden chest. Miracles and cures began to occur in continually increasing numbers. Gradually, Saint Dymphna's fame as patroness of victims of nervous diseases and mental disorders was spread from country to country. More and more mentally afflicted persons were brought to the shrine by relatives and friends, many coming in pilgrimages from far off distant places. Novenas were made, and Saint Dymphna's relics were placed to the patients. That remarkable cures reported caused confidence in the saint to grow daily. At first, the patients were lodged in a small add-on that was built into the church. Then gradually it came about that patients were placed in the homes of the family living in Geel, Belgium. Now picture that for a moment. People that had, it was kind of, but where we would say schizophrenia and bipolar and anxiety problems and depression and a lot of serious illnesses were gradually put in patients of the homes living in Geel. From that very beginning, Geel began to develop into a town world famed for its care of the insane and mentally afflicted. An institution called the Infirmatory of St. Elizabeth, which was conducted and constructed by the Sisters of St. Augustine, was later built for the hospital care of the patients. Most of the latter, after some time spent in the institution, again were placed in one or other of the families of the Geel, the residents of Geel. There they led a comparatively normal life. Every home in Geel is proud to welcome to its innermost family circle such patients as are ready to return to the environment of family life. Generations of experience have given to the people of Geel an intimate and tender skill in dealing with their challenges, and the remote spirit of charity and Christ-like love for these affected members of society gives to our modern day world, so prone to its whole reliance on science and to forge the principles to true Christian charity, a lesson to practice of which would do so much to restore certain types of mentally afflicted individuals to an almost normal outlook on life. With that, renowned psychiatrists are in full agreement with this statement and testify that a surprisingly large number of patients could leave mental institutions if they could be assured of a sympathetic reception in the world. Let me repeat that. Large number of patients could leave mental institutions if they could be assured of a sympathetic reception in society. such as the people of Geel take so much pride in showing. In fact, psychiatrists state that institutions can help, certainly, in certain cases, only to a given extent. And when that point is reached, they have they must have help from the persons outside of that institution. If the progress made in that institution is to have fruition, Geel is a living confirmation of this statement, an exemplar of the gospel teachings on charity. Now, my question to all of you with this story: how does America compare to the lessons and the life shown by Dymphna and by the people of Geel, Belgium? Think about that for a minute. The only time mental health takes a front seat in society is in our judicial system. And many of the prosecutors that prosecute cases of criminal activity, mental health is unexcused. That is the thought. Now, I realize a lot of people do use mental health as an excuse. Darrell Brooks, I'm not saying he doesn't have mental health problems, but if you watch that trial of the Waukesha Christmas parade, his mother and grandmother, mental health, mental health, mental health. But look at the length and the history of his criminal activity. He had felonies and prison times and offenses throughout 3 states. Now, certainly, someone has to be not right in the brain to have that much anger to, if I don't get my way, things, everybody's got hell to pay. Certainly. But to not get help or not go into an institution voluntarily, that's his own doing. But for those that have no history of violence, that just go astray and have documentation of diagnosis, mental health is not an excuse. Here's a couple cases. Remember the Slender Man stabbings? I can't remember the first one, but Morgan Geyser and another friend lured a friend, Peyton, into a wooded area before stabbing her in a attempt to please a fictional character named Slenderman. Thankfully, Peyton survived, but a jury found both of these two young ladies to be mentally insane and was sentenced to 40 years in a mental institution. After serving, now get this, 1/4 or less of their sentence, were granted conditional release because the people that treated her and were there with her for every bit of these years says that she is no longer a danger to either herself or the public. Now, when I watch some of the conditional and the release hearings about if when both parties, are trying to find conditions that both the prosecution and the defense agree with, I see a lot of comments saying that there is no consideration for the victims. We need to show consideration for the victims of this crime. They should serve every day of those 40 years before they even get out. Okay, got it. We need to speak. We need to really consider in our judicial system, we need to consider the feelings and the stuff of the victims. Got it. Sidney Powell stabbed her mom in Akron and killed her, and there was a lot of witnesses to this, and she was on a phone with the college administrator, and a lot of this came through trial. But who is exactly the victim in this crime. Now, the prosecution represents the entire community of Akron and is a state prosecutor for the state of Ohio. So, is the entire community of Akron and the state of Ohio affected by this? Sure, the state of Ohio and Akron took a, you know, oh boy, that is such a tragedy. Or is Mr. Powell, Brenda Powell's family, and all of Sydney's relatives a victim of this crime? Consider that for a second. The family of Sydney asked the prosecutors if they could consider not to go to trial. The prosecutors, um, I'm really sorry, but there's nothing I can do. Our hands are tied. Sounds like a you problem. We're going to trial because we can. We're going to prosecute and file charges against Sydney because we can. Ohio versus Sydney Powell, or the Powell family against Sidney Powell when the Sidney Powell family didn't want to take this to trial and wanted to try and get her maybe community service, have her admitted into a state institution for mental health to be able to, but they didn't want this to be like a 15-year to life prison sentence. Wanted to get her the help that she needed. Now, did the Akron County prosecutors take Sydney to trial to ensure justice was served for Sydney's crime? Or because this was such a public spectacle and well known throughout the state of Ohio that they wanted to bring charges and take Sydney to trial for their own publicity, to get noticed, to get their face out there? Think of that for a second. Or did the Akron prosecutors want to make sure that Brenda got her voice in court, got her day in court? This horrible crime that was committed against Brenda Powell by her own daughter. Or did they bring charges against Sidney Powell and want to prosecute her and wanted the trial to be on YouTube for their own ego? Think about that for a second. Carly Gregg killed her mom, was convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The family of Carly Gregg is now spending their resources to file an appeal and overturn this verdict, a similar case to that of Sydney's. Now, what is so devastating to me, this is just my opinion, with Sydney and Carly's case, is clearly both Sidney Powell's family and Carly Gregg's family knows that this was not typical of these women. Both of these families know that these women have no history of violence. Everything that I have seen prior to these instances, these women, they were great women. They were a great child. And these two families know that this was not typical of them. That's very obvious that both families of these women know about their mental diagnosis, know about their problems. And both of these cases are not about Carly going to Ohio and killing Sydney's mom, or Sydney going to Mississippi and killing Carly's mom. And then both families and stuff want justice for the other person. These cases happen within their household. Now, to me, and this is just my opinion, but justice is about taking how someone was wronged and making it right, about making the perpetrator accountable. But we both know that two wrongs, and I'm sure agree that prosecutors will agree that two wrongs don't make a right. Example, Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand. Now, prosecutors will know that it was wrong for those people to be abused, but if the Franke children would not have, if they would have not been caught, and the Franke children would have killed both Jody and Ruby and their parents, the prosecutor probably would have sympathized with the reasoning, but they would have said, no, two wrongs don't make a right. In both cases, how did the prosecution get funded? How did the prosecution get funded for these two cases? Taxes of the people. When the convictions was handed down and the sentence, who paid the court fees and the felony charges that were issued against these people? I don't know about Sydney, but I would assume Sydney's family probably picked up the tab, and also Carly Gregg's family picked up the tab. She was only 14, so she had no money, or actually 15 at the time, and they didn't even want to go to trial in the first place. These families had relatives stolen from them, and both these families have to put up resources to file an appeal in the hopes that their conviction is overturned. And taxes are probably paying for the state prosecutors to fight the appeal of the family that were most affected. Now, does that make any sense to anybody with a functional brain? I count 5 counts of theft. First, the prosecutors was stealing from the taxpayers to get their own publicity and ego satisfied. And the victims have their loved ones stolen from them. Mental health in America seems to be like a diagnosis that prosecutors and the courts and government officials can make money on so that they can exclude them from society. Put in the comment section if you disagree or agree, but that's just my take on it. The city of Geel, Belgium, has a foster care system for people dealing with mental health issues. These foster families sometimes host their boarders for decades, making them an integral part of the nuclear family. Think about that for a minute. These strangers that have mental health, that these families have no clue on who they are, what they are, or they just know they have some type of mental diagnosis. Make them part of their family. Now that might be hard to understand, but I will put a link in the description if anyone wants to become a supporter in Carly's great case, because I have a Facebook page where I made just after her sentencing. It has 270. There's probably about 3 other Facebook groups in support of Carly Gregg. At the start of it, yeah, we were all strangers that become members, and after a while, we become friends. But guess what now? 7 months or so after her verdict, we have become a large family. The family sees the care that they provide as normal because many know it from their parents, their grandparents, aunts, and uncles. This system is within the DNA of Geel Belgium. By fostering in this way, the families want to normalize the lives of those with mental illness, treating them not as patients with a diagnosis to be institutionalized, but as individuals deserving of dignity, respect, and inclusion. Where America thinks that people with mental health and mental illness, especially most people with mental illness are diagnosed as a child, they are to be disrespected without dignity, violate their civil rights, and exclude them from community. exclude them from society. If Sidney Powell's family gets her conviction overturned, she already has a new trial. If Carly Gregg gets a new trial or gets their verdict overturned, or when they agree on the conditional release of the Slender Man stabbing, are these three women going to be assured of having a sympathetic reception in society? I pray to Saint Dymphna, to Ashley Smiley, Brenda Powell, and I hope for sure Peyton, as well as all of America, give them that sympathetic reception. And be like Geel, more caring, compassionate, hospitable, and welcome. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment on this story, and Saint Dymphna, pray for us. I will see you next time.
Don't you worry about a thing. You get what you're given, but it's never too late to spread your wings.